A few weeks ago, we took the admittedly bold step of doing a video on the history of Dave Meltzer's 5-star matches. Then we looked at the comments and took notes like a Roman emperor surveying the carnage of the Colosseum floor below. And there we learned one very important fact. There are a lot of WWE matches out there that didn't get a 5-star rating, which probably should have. So we've collected 10 of the more obvious candidates that were snubbed by Meltzer's star rating system. Quite a few are from the 2000s, a decade which famously saw 0 5-star matches under the WWE banner, but there's some more modern efforts as well, and a couple of golden oldies. Also, before we get underway, we're planning to do a second video where we include 10 more matches that missed the cut this time, so be sure to suggest your favorites in the comments section down below, and try not to argue, please. Seriously, stop arguing. Stop. Oh god. I'm Jack from Cultaholic, and these are 10 WWE matches that should have been 5 stars, but weren't. Number 10, Randy Savage versus Ricky Steamboat, WrestleMania 3. I'm sure I speak for everyone watching this video when I say I'm sick of these damn kids flying around the ring and doing their somersaults and their flippy whippies. Every cool wrestling fan knows that there's nothing cooler than slowing down and grabbing a hold, brother. Well, maybe the most famous route of this frantic modern wrestling style with its choreographed sequences and breathless back and forth action comes from WrestleMania 3. Yes, the same show that saw a quite historic peak of sports entertainment, which was a big blonde muscly man slamming a man whose surname is literally The Giant, also saw a historic peak in terms of work rate. In an era where rehearsed choreography wasn't quite as frequent as it is today, Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat famously practiced their IC title match to within an inch of its life, and the result was spectacular. This match is a polished, thrilling encounter between two of the industry's most skilled stars of the day, far beyond anything WWF audiences may have been used to seeing at the time. The slick counters and momentum shifts build upon a solid foundation of classic heel versus babyface storytelling, with Steamboat making his comeback to the ring after being injured by Macho Man months earlier. And yes, through modern eyes, the match might seem a bit underwhelming if you're watching it for the first time, but given its legendary status and the hype around it, that's possibly understandable. However, in context, I think it's unquestionably a classic. Number 9, The Rock versus Hollywood Hulk Hogan, WrestleMania 18. When talking about 5-star matches, it's usually assumed that work rate will be front and center. But what good is it putting on a great match if there's no one in the building to see it, dude? That's where the megastars come in, selling tickets with their big muscles and their big voices and their big... they're so massive, aren't they? Sometimes a match's star power is so gargantuan, so undeniable, that it elevates the very quality of the match itself, even before a single punch has been thrown. That is certainly the case in terms of The Rock and Hogan's clash at WrestleMania 18, one of the main candidates which people often point out in opposition to Meltzer's ratings. Yes, it may not have been the best in terms of raw athleticism or even wrestling fundamentals, but just listen to that crowd. And they were so loud because Rock versus Hogan represented a lot of things. It was a genuine dream match between two of wrestling's biggest ever names. It was a battle of different generations, and there was even a sense of WWF versus WCW in there as well. But just as importantly, the action wasn't too shabby either. The Rock and Hogan wrestled a very intelligent match, tweaking the expected heel babyface dynamic because, wisely, they realized that the crowd just wasn't going to boo the Hulkster. If they had a rematch today, I suspect it might have gone a bit differently, but this was 2002 and The Rock decided to heel it up. This was a very good choice, making Hogan's big comeback one of the most spine-tingling moments in WrestleMania history, although thankfully, I think the right decision still occurred because The Rock still got the win. Number 8, Sami Zayn versus Shinsuke Nakamura, NXT TakeOver Dallas. I'll be honest with you, I put this match next to draw an interesting comparison between this one and the previous one, thereby making me look very clever indeed. The Rock versus Hulk Hogan was built on the hype of seeing two galactic megastars do battle on the grandest stage of them all. But ZAYN versus Nakamura shows us how wrestling fandom had transformed over the course of the following decade and a half. When WWE signed a handful of big names away from New Japan, including AJ Styles and the Good Brothers, social media stepped in and basically did the promotion's job of promoting for it. Cool, handsome fans already familiar with New Japan's roster helped fill in the blanks for the more timid, nerdy fans who didn't yet understand the international wrestling scene. And basically, what I'm trying to say is the big conversation online made everybody realize that the most intriguing intriguing signing of all, at least for NXT, was Shinsuke Nakamura. Nakamura had already built a reputation as a modern great in New Japan, so when WWE decided to book his debut on WrestleMania weekend against Sami Zayn, intrigue went through the roof. I'm not trying to suggest that AJ Styles didn't matter, but Shinsuke Nakamura, he wasn't your typical kind of WWE signing now, was he? A massive star in New Japan who wrestled quite a different style. So from there, with all this intrigue and all this hype, all the match had to do was speak for itself, and my word, it did. Zayn and Nakamura put on an absolute barn burner in Dallas, the perfect introduction for Shinsuke to a Western audience, with the perfect opponent to complement his in-ring style. And yes, Sami bounced around like a pinball for the very strike-heavy Nakamura, but he also got in some typically incredible offense of his own. If this build was a masterclass in the idea of less is more, the match itself spared no expense, and it's a real epic worthy of either man's back catalogue. Number 7, Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker, WrestleMania 26. Many people cite Michaels and Taker's first WrestleMania match as the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. And while they're wrong because it's Bret versus Austin at WrestleMania 13, I respect their opinion anyway because I'm a really great guy. But in all seriousness, HBK versus Taker at WrestleMania 25 is rightly remembered as an all-time great match. But sometimes I lie awake at night wondering that it overshadows its own sequel, guys. The rematch at WrestleMania 26 doesn't quite stand up to its predecessor in terms of sheer work rate, and that's fine. But the storyline behind it is one of the best I can remember in my entire experience as a wrestling fan. I feel like I've talked about it enough times on video because I always cite it as an example of one of my favorite builds ever, but here's the basic rundown. Shawn is sad because he couldn't beat The Undertaker or The Streak at WrestleMania 25, so he challenges Taker to a rematch, and Taker says no. Shawn then tries to force his way into a title match by winning the Royal Rumble because Taker's champion by this point, but Shawn gets eliminated and is very sad. Oh. Shawn then costs Undertaker his title at Elimination Chamber, rising through the chamber floor like a desperate divorced cowboy dad and ending the dead man's reign. This provokes Taker into accepting the rematch, but on one condition. If HBK loses, he'll have to retire forever. The twists and turns might not be the most complex in this storyline, but it's still drama at its very highest, and these heightened stakes and the long history between both men within WWE make it a classic example of wrestling storytelling, and that's just my opinion, but I've seen it shared by a lot of people. This is a great build. The match itself is fantastic as well, maybe not quite as perfect as the one the year before, but that's okay because it's the story of an aging legend going out on his shield, so I can kind of forgive the more tentative pace for really letting this sense of drama breathe. It was the perfect ending to an all-time great career, wasn't it, Shawn? Wasn't it, Shawn? Wasn't it the perfect ending? Why did you have to ruin it by coming back in Saudi Arabia? Why did you have to... Number 6, Bret Hart versus Owen Hart at WrestleMania 10. I think we can all agree that brothers are the worst, am I right? What are they like, always stealing your Pokemon cards and eating the bowl of berries and cream that you've lovingly prepared with berries from the garden of the manor house at the top of your street? It really is despicable. I can only guess that that is sort of how Bret Hart felt at WrestleMania 10. Owen's betrayal of his older brother led to what many consider the greatest opening match in WrestleMania history. After the weird Las Vegas car park Roman Empire fever dream that was Mania 9, the following year's effort opened by taking things back to basics with an excellent technical wrestling match. And this sense of expertise from two absolute in-ring greats, coupled with the very personal resentment of two feuding brothers, made for an enthralling contest, one which also benefited from an incredibly bold booking decision, that being that Owen actually won. This was even more shocking when you consider that Bret then went on to win the WWF Championship by the end of the night, which obviously gave Owen an instant claim to a title shot and set up that amazing steel cage rematch at SummerSlam 94. And that cage match received 5 stars, but this one didn't, and we think that's very sad. Number 5, Triple H versus Cactus Jack, Royal Rumble 2000. Alright, we've gone long enough in this video without talking about weapons. Chairs, tables, the ring bell, thumbtacks, bits of wood with barbed wire wrapped around it. All of these things were ingredients that went into making Triple H versus Cactus Jack the iconic WWE street fight. This match was built upon a simple notion. Triple H thought he was defending his title against Mankind, when in reality, he was defending it against Cactus Jack. And for those who don't know, that is the same man, yeah, but one who enjoys dishing out pain rather than whatever Mankind enjoy, like making weird sounds and wearing an awkward leather mask and waving one of his socks around. It's often said, and not without some justification by the way, that this match made Triple H. Until then, he'd been a very good, but kind of an upstart heel champion, but by surviving Foley and even beating him, that made him into the sort of top villain that would dominate for years to come. Foley would also go on to legitimize the likes of Randy Orton and Edge in similar matches, but I think this one's the more iconic of the three. And for all the brutality throughout this match, I could pick favorite moments from any part of it, but I think my absolute favorite moment is the finish. That involves Foley unthinkably kicking out of the pedigree, only for Triple H to hit him with another one, face first, into thumbtacks. Ouch. And he didn't even get 5 stars for taking that bump. He should have though, and that's why it's on this list. Number 4, Triple H versus Shawn Michaels versus Chris Benoit, WrestleMania 20. Obviously, Benoit is always a tricky subject, but ignoring this match would also, I think, be doing a disservice to the other two men who also made it great, Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Many people point to Daniel Bryan's triumph at WrestleMania 30 as the most perfect, happy ending to a show in all of wrestling, and they've definitely got a point. The precursor to that match, though, came 10 years earlier, when Benoit finally won the title, despite being this undersized underdog, but having the strength of being, a real wrestler's wrestler. And while history has obviously made the Bryan victory more fondly remembered, it's hard to argue that that match was better than this one. I really think the WrestleMania 21 is leagues ahead in terms of match quality. Benoit's gritty, unflashy style clashed very, very well with HBK's showstopper antics and obviously Triple H's unashamed heelishness, all building through various nail-biting false finishes to a big heroic triumph at the end. And once again, it's hard to look at this match quite as fondly these days, especially with Benoit very much playing the role of this heroic protagonist, but the quality of the match itself cannot be denied. Number 3, Sasha Banks versus Bayley, NXT TakeOver Brooklyn. These days, women's wrestling in WWE is thankfully largely unrecognizable from what it was 10 or 15 years ago. It's now not unusual at all to see a women's match be the main attraction of a pay-per-view or the most impressive bout on the card when all is said and done. And there were various moments throughout the 2010s that helped propel women's wrestling forwards, from the work of stars like AJ Lee and Paige through to the meteoric rise of Becky Lynch. But in terms of sheer in-ring artistry, the best moment in my opinion came at TakeOver Brooklyn. Sasha Banks and Bayley told the simplest of all wrestling stories over the course of their NXT feud. This plucky, naive babyface coming up against the arrogant heel champion. But once they finally set foot in the ring, they very much elevated this classic template into the modern era. What followed was a real modern-day main event, although it wasn't actually the main event of the show. With two women wrestling not only for each other and themselves, but for the growth of women's wrestling in general. Watching the match in this context makes it an even more emotionally engaging affair, as well as just a sheer battle of good versus evil. Although it's also worth mentioning that even in a vacuum without all of this context surrounding it, the match is just an absolute banger. Number 2, DIY versus The Revival, NXT TakeOver Toronto. In terms of sheer fame, I suppose, this match might seem a bit high on this list, but it's my list, and I'll do what I want, alright? No, I don't want to eat my vegetables, and I don't want to go to bed on time. What are you gonna do? We're sticking with NXT for a second, and possibly my favorite NXT match of all time. It's time to talk about the 2 out of 3 Falls classic between Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa, and The Revival, now known of course as FTR. Obviously, a lot has since changed for the 4 men involved. DIY fell apart, feuded, went their separate ways, and have now eventually both found themselves back, this time on the main roster. The Revival are well, they're kind of just doing the same thing they did back then, which is having incredible tag team matches and being very, very grizzled indeed. Only now, I guess you could say, they're enjoying far more critical acclaim for doing so, and that's good for them. This match, though, was the culmination of an excellent feud between both teams, and honestly, I think it might be the most confusing omission from Meltzer's 5-star canon. I mean, it literally takes all the boxes: incredible in-ring action, an amazing structure full of very innovative twists and turns, a very strong heel babyface dynamic leading to a molten hot crowd. It even took place in Canada, where good wrestling is born. Alongside Japan, obviously, let's not overlook Japan. I guess if wrestling was a baby, then Canada and Japan would be its very stern, serious parents. America is the fun uncle of wrestling, by the way, and Mexico is the even more fun uncle. It's so crazy and chaotic over there, the wrestling sometimes. I guess the UK is like a strict school teacher or something. I'm gonna end this metaphor now. Watch this match back and make a case for me in the comments why it didn't receive 5 stars, if you dare. If you agree with me, try not to be too mean to Dave. It's only one man's opinion, but in this case, gets his opinions very wrong. And finally, number 1, Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker, WrestleMania 25. Of course, now you didn't think I was going to pick anything else for number 1, did you? But you can't really talk about this topic and not mention Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker from Mania 25. Famously, Meltzer only gave out 7 5-star matches in the whole decade of the 2000s, and none of those 5-star matches were for a bout held in WWE. Of all the many fantastic matches that missed out in this time, the most often mentioned is surely this one. People can't believe that this match didn't receive 5 stars, is what I'm saying. The story of this match goes that Michaels and Taker were a little bit annoyed at not being in the main event of Mania 25, what with the whole being 2 of the greatest superstars of all time and the streak being on the line and everything, so they were quite cross. So in response, they went out and had a match so good, so epic, that WWE couldn't then not book the rematch as the following year's main event. Even this bout's most famous misstep, Taker's terrifying dive to the outside, has become a very integral part of this contest, which overall is just a display of wrestling drama at its very finest. The closing stretch is maybe the best representation of this, and even though the very notion of kicking out of finishers is quite often mocked these days for its overuse, when it's saved for the right moments, it can elevate blockbuster matches to an even crazier level. And there you have it. Those are 10 WWE matches that weren't 5 stars in the opinion of Dave Meltzer, but probably should have been. Thanks very much for watching, and remember to leave your suggestions in the comments section down below. We'll pick up this topic in future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon.